Second, I was really struck by so many things in Moscow and really deeply bothered by a lot of things that I saw there. But one thing I noticed was the total absence of cult of personality propaganda, which I expected to see and have seen around the world. Jordan, for example. I don't know if you've been to Jordan, but go to Jordan. In every building, there are pictures of the king and his extended family. And that's a sign of political insecurity. You don't create a cult of personality unless you're personally insecure and also unless you're worried about losing your grip on power. None of that. It's interesting. And I expected to see a lot of it, like statues of Putin. No, there are no statues of anybody other than like Christian saints. So that was like, I'm not quite sure. I'm just reporting what I saw. So yes, it's not in a political sense, it's not a free country. It's not a democracy in the way that we would understand it or want. I don't want to live there. Okay. Because I like to say what I think. In fact, I make my living doing it. But it's not Stalinist in a recognizable way. And anyone who says it is should go there and tell me how.
I mean, this question about the freedom of the press is underlying the very fact of the interview you're having with him.
Right.
So you might not need to ask the Navalny question, but did you feel like, are there things I shouldn't say?
I mean, how honest do you want me to be? I mean it when I say I felt not one twinge of concern for the 8 days that I was there. Maybe I just didn't. And I feel like I've got a pretty strong gut sense of things. I rely on it. I make all my decisions based on how I feel, my instincts. And I didn't feel it at all. My lawyers before I left, and these are people who work for a big law firm. This is not Bob's law firm. This is one of the biggest law firms in the world. Said, you're going to get arrested if you do this by the U.S. government on sanctions violations. And I said, well, I don't recognize the legitimacy of that actually, because I'm American and I've lived here my whole life. And that's so outrageous that I'm happy to face that risk because I so reject the premise. Okay. I'm an American. I should be able to talk to anyone I want to. And I plan to exercise that freedom, which I think I was born with. And I gave them this long lecture. They're like, we're just lawyers. But that was, let me put it this way. I don't know how much you dealt with lawyers, but it costs many thousands of dollars to get a conclusion like that. Like they sent a whole bunch of their summer associates or whatever. They put a lot of people on this question, checked a lot of precedent. And they sent me a 10-page memo on it. And their sincere conclusion was, do not do this. And of course it made me mad. So I was lecturing on the phone and I had another call with the head lawyer. And he said, well, look, a lot will depend on the questions that you ask Putin. Mm-hmm. If you're seen as too nice to him, you could get arrested when you come back. Mm. And I was like, you're describing a fascist country, okay? You're saying that the U.S. government will arrest me if I don't ask the questions they want asked? That's what you're saying? Well, we just think based on what's happened that that's possible. And so I'm just telling you what happened.
So you were okay being arrested in Moscow?
I didn't think I was
arrested in...
I didn't think for a second. I mean, maybe, look, I don't speak Russian. I'd never been there before. Mm-hmm. Everything about the culture was brand new to me. Ignorance does protect you, sort of, when you have no freaking idea what's going on. You're not worried about it. Like, this has happened to me many times. There's a principle there that extends throughout life. So it's completely possible that I was in grave peril and didn't know it. Because, how would I know it? I'm like a bumbling English speaker from California. But I didn't feel it at all.
But the lawyers did.
Yeah, I mean, it scared the crap out of people. You're going to... And look, you have to pay in cash. They don't take credit cards because of sanctions. And you have to go through all these hoops, just procedural hoops, to go to Russia, which I was willing to do because I wanted to interview Putin, because they told me I couldn't. But then there's another fact, which is that I was being surveilled by the U.S. government, intensely surveilled by the U.S. government. And this came out. They admitted it. The NSA admitted it a couple of years ago that they were up in my Signal account. And then they leaked it to the New York Times. They did that again before I left. And I know that because 2 New York Times reporters, one of whom I actually like a lot, said, oh, you're going, and called other people. Oh, he's going to interview Putin. I hadn't told anybody that, like anybody, like my wife, 2 producers, that's it. So they got that from the government. Then I'm over there, and of course I want to see Snowden, who I admire. And so we have a mutual friend, so I got his text and come on over, and Snowden does not want publicity at all. Mm-hmm. And so, but I really wanted to have dinner with him. So we had dinner in my hotel room at the Four Seasons in Moscow. And I tried to convince him, I'd love to do an interview, shoot it on my iPhone. I'd love to take a picture together and put it on the internet because I just want to show support because I think he's been railroaded. He had no interest in living in Russia, no intention of being in Russia. The whole thing is a lie. But anyway, whatever. All this stuff. And he just said, respectfully, I'd rather not anyone know that we met. Great. The only reason I'm telling you this is because, and I didn't tell anybody, and I didn't text it to anybody, okay, except him. Mm-hmm. Semaphore, runs this piece saying, reporting information they got from the U.S. intel agencies, leaking against me using my money in my name in a supposedly free country. They run this piece saying I'd met with Snowden, like it was a crime or something. So again, my interest is in the United States and preserving freedoms here, the ones that I grew up with. And if you have a media establishment that acts as an auxiliary of, or acts as employees of the national security state, you don't have a free country. And that's where we are. And I'm not guessing because I spent my entire life in that world. 33 years I worked in big news companies. And so I know how it works. I know the people involved in it. I could name them. Ben Smith of Semaphore, among many others. And I find that really objectionable, not just on principle either, in effect, in practice. I don't want to live in that kind of country. And people are like, they externalize all of their anxiety about this, I have noticed. So it's like, Russia's not free. Yeah, I know. Neither's, Burkina Faso. Like most countries aren't free, actually, but we are. We're the United States. We're different. And that's my concern. Preserving that is my concern. And so they get so exercised about what's happening in other parts of the world, places they've never been, know nothing about. It's almost a way of ignoring what's happening in their own country right around them. I find it so strange and sad and weird.
So the NSA was tracking you? Do you think CIA was? Is people still tracking you?
Look, one of the things I did before I went, just because of the business I'm in, all of us are in, and just because we live here, we all have theories about secure communications channels. Like Signal is secure, Telegraph isn't, or WhatsApp is owned by Mark Zuckerberg. You can't trust it. Okay. So I thought, before I go over here, I was getting all this, we're having all these conversations, my producers and I, about this. And I decided, I'm just gonna actually find out like what's really going on. So I talked to 2 people who would know, trust me. And it's all I can say. And I hate to be like, I talk to people who would know, but I can't do there. But I mean it. Mm-hmm. They would know. And both of them said exactly the same thing, which is, are you joking? Nothing is secure. Everything is monitored all the time. If state actors are involved, I mean, you can keep the, the Malaysian mafia from reading your text, probably. You cannot keep the big intel services from reading your text. It's not possible. Any of them, or listening to your calls. So, and that was the firm conclusion of people who've been involved in it, for a long time, decades, in both cases. So I just thought, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. I'm not sending a ton of naked pictures of myself to anybody.
Not a ton, just a little.
Not a ton. I'm 54, dude. Probably not too many.
All right.
But you see, so I'm like, I'm just, so the guys, I travel with 3 people I work with who I love, who I've been around the world with for many years, and I know them really, really well. And they all got, separate phones, and I'm leaving my other phone back in New York or whatever. And I just decided I don't care, actually. And I resent having to no privacy, because privacy is a prerequisite for freedom. But I can't change it. And so I have the same surveilled cell phone. And, I do switch them out because there it is. Because if you have too much spyware on your phone, this is true, it wrecks the battery. And no, I'm serious. It does. And it was, 5 or 6 years ago, we went to North Korea, and my phone started acting crazy. And so I talked to someone on the National Security Council who called me about this, somehow knew that your phone is being surveilled by the South Korean government. I was like, I like the South Korean government. Why would they do that? Because they want more information. They thought I was talking to Trump or whatever. So, but I could tell because all of a sudden the thing would just drain in like 45 minutes. So that's a downside.
So you keep switching phones, getting new phones for the battery life.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to do it. I'm kind of flinty Yankee type in some ways, so I don't like to spend $1,000 with a freaking Apple corporation too often. But yeah, I do.
I mean, you say it lightly, but it's really troublesome that you as a journalist would be tracked.
Well, they leaked it to Semaphore, and they leaked it to the New York Times. Look, I would even put up. Well, there's nothing I can do, so I have to put up with everything. Okay, but I would probably not be actively angry about being surveilled because I'm just so old, and I actually do pay my taxes. I'm not sleeping with the makeup artist or whatever, so I don't care that much. The fact that they are leaking against me, that the intel services in the United States are actively engaged in U.S. politics and media, that's so unacceptable. That makes democracy impossible. There's no defense of that, and yet NBC News, Ken Delanian, and the rest will defend it. And it's like, and not just on NBC News, by the way, on the supposedly conservative channels too, they will defend it. And there's no defending that. You can't have democracy if the intel services are tampering in elections and information, period.
So you had no fear. Your lawyer said, be careful which questions you asked. You said, I don't have.
Well, the lawyer said, no, he said very specifically, if, depending on the questions you ask Putin, you could be arrested or not. And I said, listen to what you're saying. You're saying the U.S. government has control over my questions and they'll arrest me if I ask the wrong question? How are we better than Putin if that's true? And by the way, that's just what the lawyer said, but I can't overstate one of the biggest law firms in the United States, smart lawyers we've used for years. So I was really shocked by it.
You said leaders kill, leaders lie.
Yeah. I don't believe in leaders very much. This whole Zelensky's Jesus and Putin's Satan. It's no, they're all leaders of countries, okay? Grow up a little bit, you child. Have you ever met a leader? First of all, anyone who seeks power is damaged morally, in my opinion. You shouldn't be seeking power. You can't seek power or wealth for its own sake and remain a decent person. That's just true. So there aren't any really virtuous billionaires, and there aren't any really virtuous world leaders. You have grades of virtue. Some are better than others, for sure. But, in other words, Zelensky may be better than Putin. I'm open to that possibility. But to claim that one is evil and the other is virtuous, it's like you're revealing that you're a child. You don't know anything about how the world actually is or what reality is. Like it's
That's quite a realist perspective, but there is a spectrum.
There's a spectrum. Absolutely. I'm not saying they're all the same. They're not.
And our task is to figure out where on the spectrum they lie. And the leader's task is to confuse us and convince us they're one of the good guys.
Of course. But I actually reject even that formulation. I don't think it's always about the leaders. I mean, of course, the leaders make the difference. A good leader has a healthy country and a bad leader has a decaying country, which is something to think about. But it's about the ideas and the policies and the practical effect of things. So we're very much caught up in the personalities of various leaders, not just our political leaders, but our business leaders, our cultural leaders. Are they good people? Do they have the right thoughts? It's like, no, I ask a much more basic question. What are the fruits of their behavior? And I always make it personal because I think everything is personal. Does his wife respect him? Do his children respect him? How are they doing? Is the country he runs thriving or is it falling apart? If your life expectancy is going down, if your suicide rate is going up, if your standard of living is tanking, you're not a good leader. I don't care what you tell me. I don't care what you claim you represent. I don't care about the ideas or the systems that you say you embody. It's dogs barking to me. How's your life expectancy? How's your suicide rate? What's drug use like? Are people having children? Are people's children more likely to live in a freer, more prosperous society than you did and their grandparents did? Like, those are the only measures that matter to me. The rest is a lie. But anyway, the point is, we just get so obsessed with like the theater around people or people, and we miss the bigger things that are happening, and we allow ourselves to be deceived into thinking that what doesn't matter at all matters, that moral victories are all that matters. No, actually, facts on the ground victories matter more than anything. I mean, you certainly see it in this country. Black Lives Matter, for example. How many black people did that help? It hurt a lot of black people, but in the end, we should be able to measure it. You know, like how many black people have died by gunfire in the 4 years since George Floyd died? Well, the number's gone way, way up. And that was a Black Lives Matter operation, defund the police. So I think we can say, as a factual matter, a data-based matter, Black Lives Matter didn't help black people. And if it did, tell me how. Well, these are important moral victories. I'm over that. That's just another lie, a long litany of lies. So I try to see the rest of the world that way. But more than anything, I try to see world events through the lens of an American, because I am one. And what does this mean for us? And it's not even the war, it's the sanctions that will forever change the United States, our standard of living, the way our government operates. That, more than any single thing in my lifetime, screwed the United States. Levying those sanctions in the way that we did was crazy. And that for me, the main takeaway from my 8 days in Moscow was not Putin. He's a leader, whatever. None of them are that different, actually, in my pretty extensive experience. No, it was Moscow. That blew my mind. I was not prepared for that at all. And I thought I knew a lot about Moscow. My dad worked there on and off in the 80s and 90s because he was a U.S. government employee, and he was always coming back, Moscow, it's a nightmare and all this stuff, no electricity. I got there almost exactly 2 years after sanctions, totally cut off from Western financial systems, kicked out of SWIFT, can't use U.S. dollars, no banking, no credit cards. And that city, just factually, I'm not endorsing the system, I'm not endorsing the whole country. I didn't go to Lake Baikal. I didn't go to Turkmenistan. I just went to Moscow, largest city in Europe, 13 million people. I drove all around it. And that city is way nicer, outwardly anyway, I don't live there, than any city we have, by a lot. And by nicer, let me be specific. No graffiti, no homeless, no people using drugs in the street, totally tidy, no garbage on the ground, and no forest of steel and concrete soul-destroying buildings. None of the postmodern architecture that oppresses us without even our knowledge. None of that crap. It's a truly beautiful city. And that's not an endorsement of Putin. And by the way, it didn't make me love Putin. It made me hate my own leaders. Because I grew up in a country that had cities kind of like that were nice cities, that were safe. And we don't have that anymore. And how did that happen? Did Putin do that? I don't think Putin did that, actually. I think the people in charge of it, the mayors, the governors, the president, they did that. And they should be held accountable for it.
So I think cleanliness and architectural design is not the entirety of the metrics that matter when you measure a city.
They're the main metrics that matter. The main metrics that matter are cleanliness, safety, and beauty, in my opinion. And one of the big lies that we are told in our world is that, no, something you can't measure that has no actual effect on your life matters most. Bullshit. What matters most, to say it again, beauty, safety, cleanliness. Lots of other things matter too. A whole bunch of things matter. But if I were to put them in order, it's not some theoretical, well, actually, I don't know if you know that the Duma has no power. It's like, okay, I get that. Freedom of speech matters enormously to me. They have less freedom of speech in Russia than we do in the United States. We are superior to them in that way. But you can't tell me that living in a city where, your 6-year-old daughter can walk to the bus stop and ride on a clean bus or ride in a beautiful subway car that's on time and not get assaulted, that doesn't matter. No, that matters almost more than anything, actually. And we can have both. And the normal regime defenders and morons, Jon Stewart or whatever he's calling himself, they're like, well, that's the price of freedom. Like people shitting on the sidewalk is the price of freedom. It's like, you can't fool me because I've lived here for 54 years. I know that it's not the price of freedom because I lived in a country that was both free and clean and orderly. So that's not a trade-off I think I have to make. You can't, that is the beauty of being a little bit older, because you're like, no, I remember that actually. It wasn't what you're saying. We didn't have racial segregation in 1985. It was a really nice country that kind of respected itself. I was here. And I think with younger people, you can tell them that. And they're like, oh, 1985, you were, selling slaves in Madison Square Garden. It's like, no, they weren't. You're going to Madison Square Garden and not stepping over a single fentanyl addict.
It is true. There doesn't have to be a trade-off between cleanliness and freedom of speech. But it is also true that in dictatorships, cleanliness and architectural design is easier to achieve and perfect, and often is done so you can show off, look how great our cities are, while you're suppressing.
Of course. I agree with that vehemently. This is not a defense of the Russian system at all. And if I felt that way, I would not only move there, but I would announce I was moving there. I'm not ashamed of my views. I never have been. And for all the people who are trying to impute secret motives to my words, I'm like the one person in America you don't need to do that with. If you think I'm a racist, ask me, and I'll tell you.
Are you a racist?
Of course. No, I am a sexist, though.
All right, great.
Anyway, no, but if I was like a defender of Vladimir Putin, I would just say I'm defending Vladimir Putin now. I'm not. I am attacking our leaders. And I'm grieving over the low expectations of our people. You don't need to put up with this. You don't need to put up with foreign invaders stealing from you, occupying your kids' school. Your kids can't get an education because people from foreign countries broke our laws and showed up here and they've taken over the school. That's not a feature of freedom, actually. That's the opposite. That's what enslavement looks like. And so I'm just saying, raise your expectations a little bit. You can have a clean, functional, safe country. Crime is totally optional. Crime is something our leaders decide to have or not have. It's not something that just appears organically. I wrote a book about crime 30 years ago. I've thought a lot about this. You have as much crime as you put up with, period. And it doesn't make you less free to not tolerate murder. In fact, it makes you unfree to have a lot of murders. And so but it makes me sad that people are like, well, I guess this is, I can't live in New York City anymore because of inflation and filth and illegal aliens and people shooting each other. But, I'm glad because this is vibrant and strong and free. It's like, that's not freedom actually at all.
Your point is well taken. You can have both. But do you regret?
We had both. That's the point. We had, but I saw it.
Do you regret to a degree using the Moscow subway and the grocery store as a mechanism by which to make that point?
No. I mean, look, I'm one of the more unself-aware people you will ever interview. So to ask me, how will this be perceived? I literally have no idea and kind of limited interest, but, I was so shocked by it. I was so shocked by it. And there were two, and to the extent I regret anything and am to blame for anything, it would be not, and I've done this a lot, not giving it context, not fully explaining why are we doing this. Mm-hmm. The grocery store, I was shocked by the prices. And yes, I'm familiar with exchange rates, but very familiar with exchange rates, but those don't, and I adjusted them for exchange rates. And this is 2 years into sanctions, total isolation from the West. So I would expect, in fact, I did expect until I got there, that their supply chains would be crushed. How do you get good stuff if you don't have access to Western markets? And I didn't fully get the answer because I was occupied doing other things when I was there, but somehow they have. And that's the point. And they haven't had the supply chains problems that I predicted. In other words, sanctions haven't made the country noticeably worse. Okay. So again, this is commentary of the United States and our policymakers. Why are we doing this? It's forcing the rest of the world into a block against us called BRICS. They're getting off the US dollar. That will mean a lot of dollars are going to come back here and destroy our economy and impoverish this country. So the consequences, the stakes are really high. They're huge. And we're not even hurting Russia. So like, what the hell are we doing? One, on the subway, that subway was built by Joseph Stalin right before the Second World War. I'm not endorsing Stalin, obviously. Stalinism is the thing that I hate, and I don't want to come to my country. I'm making the obvious point that for over 80 years, you've had these frescoes and chandeliers, maybe they've been redone or whatever, but like somehow the society has been able to not destroy what its ancestors built, the things that are worth having, and there are a lot. And that, like, why don't we have that? And even on a much more terrestrial plane, like, why can't I have a subway station like that? Why can't my children who live in New York City ride the subway? A lot of people I know who live in New York City are afraid to ride the subway. Young women especially. That's freedom? No. Again, it's slavery. And if Putin can do this, why can't we? Like, what? It's not, in other words, I mean, this is like so obvious. I'm a traitor. Okay. So if I'm calling for American citizens to demand more from their government and higher standards for their own society, and remember that just 30 years ago, we had a much different and much happier and cleaner and healthier society where everyone wasn't fat with diabetes at 40 from poisoned food. Like, how is that? I'm not a traitor to my country. I'm a defender of my country. And by the way, the people calling me a traitor, they're all like, whatever. They're not. I would not say they're people who put America's interests first.
But
to put it mildly.
There's many elements, like you said, you don't like Stalinism. You're a student of history. Central planning is good at building subways in a way that's really nice. The thing that accounts for New York subways, by the way, there's a lot of really positive things about New York subways, not cleanliness, but the efficiency, like the accessibility, how wide it spreads. Like that, the New York network is incredible. But Moscow, under different metrics, results of a capitalist system, and you actually said that you don't think U.S. is quite a capitalist system, which is an interesting question in itself.
True. We have more central planning here than they do in Russia. So.
No, that's not true.
Of course it is.
You think that's true?
The climate agenda? Of course. They're telling the U.S. government has, in league with a couple of big companies, decided to change the way we produce and consume energy. There's no popular outcry for that. There's never been any mass movement of Americans who's like, I hate my gasoline-powered engine. No more diesel. That has been central planning. That is central planning. And you see it up and down our economy. There's no free market in the United States. You get crossways with the government, you're done. If you're at scale, I mean, maybe if you've got a barber shop or a liquor store or something, but even then, you're regulated by politicians. And so, no, I actually am for free markets. I hate monopolies. Our economy is dominated by monopolies. Completely dominated.
Like, what do you mean?
Google. What percentage of search does Google have? 90? Google's a monopoly by any definition, and Google is just rich enough to continue doing whatever it wants in violation of US law. So there's no monopoly in Russia as big as Google. I'm not, again, defending the Russian system. I'm calling for a return to our old system, which was sensible and moderate and put the needs of Americans at least somewhere in the top 10. I mean, somewhere in the top 10. I'm not saying that Standard Oil was like interested in the welfare of average Americans, but I am saying that there was a constituency in our political system, in the Congress, for example, different presidential candidates are like, no, wait a second. What is this doing to people? Is it good for people or not? There's not even a conversation about that. It's like, shut up and submit to AI. And no offense. And so I'm just...
Offense taken.
I'm just...
I will write... we will get you.
Yeah.
When it's strong enough.
I have no doubt.
You'll be the first one to
well,
go.
as a white man, I just won't even exist anymore.
Right. So much to say on that one.
I bet when you Google my picture 20 years from now, it'll be a black chick. 100%.
Well, I hope she's attractive.
I hope so too. It'd probably be an upgrade.
So, well, the central planning point is really interesting, but I just don't, I don't know where you're coming from. There's a capitalist system. I mean, the United States is one of the most successful capitalist systems in the history of Earth. So just
what's the most successful? I'm just saying that I think it's changed a lot in the last 15 years and that we need to update our assumptions about what we're seeing.
Sure.
And that's true up and down. That's true with everything. It's true with your neighbor's children who you haven't seen in 3 years and they come home from Wesleyan and you're like, oh, you've grown. That is true for the world around us as well. And most of our assumptions about immigration, about our economy, about our tax system are completely outdated if you compare them to the current reality. And so I'm just for updating my files, and I have a big advantage over you because I am middle-aged, and so I don't...
You've called yourself old so many times throughout this
I don't trust my perceptions of
Yes.
things, so I'm constantly trying to be like, is that true?
Yeah.
I should go there. You know, I should see it. And I guess just in the end, I trust direct perceptions. Like, I don't trust the internet, actually. Wikipedia is a joke. Wikipedia could not be more dishonest. It's certainly in the political categories or things that I know a lot about. Occasionally I read an entry written about something that I saw or know the people involved, and I'm like, well, that's a complete liar. You left out the most important fact. And it's like, it's not a reliable guide to reality or history. And that will accelerate with AI, where history, our perception of the past is completely controlled and distorted. So I think just getting out there and seeing stuff and seeing that Moscow was not what I thought it would be, which was a smoldering ruin, you know, rats in a garbage dump. It was nicer than New York. What the hell?
Direct data is good, but it's challenging. For example, if you talk to a lot of people in Moscow or in Russia and you ask them, is there censorship? They will usually say, yes, there is.
Oh, yeah, of course there is. Well, I agree. I mean, just to be clear, I have no plans to move to Russia. I think I would probably be arrested if I moved to Russia. Ed Snowden, who is, you know, the most famous sort of openness, transparency advocate in the world, I would say, along with Assange, doesn't want to live in Russia. He's had problems with the Putin government. He's attacked Putin. They don't like it. I mean, I get it. I'm just saying, what are the lessons for us? And the main lesson is we are being lied to, like in a way that's bewildering and very upsetting. I was mad about it all 8 days I was there because I feel like I'm better informed than most people because it's my job to be informed. And I'm skeptical of everything. And yet I was completely hoodwinked by it. I would just recommend to everyone watching this, like, you think you know, like, if you're really interested, if you're one of those people, and I'm not one, but who's like waking up every day and you've got a Ukrainian flag on your mailbox or whatever, your Ukrainian lapel pin, or it's like absurd theater. But if you like sincerely care about Ukraine or Russia or whatever, why don't you just hop on a plane for $800 and go see it? Okay. No one, that doesn't occur to anyone to do that. And I know it's time consuming and kind of expensive, sort of, not really. But you benefit so much. I mean, I could bore you for like 8 hours. And I know you've had this experience where you think you know what something is, or you think you know who someone is. And then you have direct experience of that place or person, and you realize all your preconceptions were totally wrong. They were controlled by somebody else. Like, you know, in fact, I won't betray confidences, but off the air, we were talking about somebody, and you said, I couldn't believe the person was not at all like what I thought. Mm-hmm. Well, that's happened to me.
In the positive direction.
In the positive direction. By the way, for me, it's almost always in that direction. Most people I meet, and I've had the great privilege of meeting a lot of people over all this time, they're way better than you think, or they're more complicated or whatever. But the point is, a direct experience unmediated by liars There's no substitute for that.
Well, on that point, direct experience in Ukraine. So I visited Ukraine and witnessed a lot of the same things you witnessed in Moscow. So first of all, beautiful architecture.
Yes.
And this is a country that's really in war. So it's not...
Oh, for real?
Like for real, where most of the men are either volunteering or fighting in the war, and there's actual tanks in the streets that are going into your major city of Kiev. And still the supply chains are working.
Yes.
Just a handful of months after the start of the war, everything is working. The restaurants are amazing. Most of the people are able to do some kind of job, like the life goes on. Cleanliness, like you mentioned.
I love
security. Like it's incredible. Like there's like crime went to zero. They gave out guns to everybody. The Texas strategy.
It does work.
Yeah, when you witness it, you realize, okay, there's something to these people. There's something to this country, that they're not as corrupt as you might hear.
Right.
You hear that Russia is corrupt, Ukraine is corrupt. You assume it's just all going to go to shit.
Well, so that's been, and I haven't been to Ukraine, and I've certainly tried, and they put me on some kill him immediately list, so I can't. I've tried to interview Zelensky. He keeps denouncing me. I just want an interview with him. He won't. Yeah. Unfortunately, I would love to do it.
I hope you do.
I do too. But one of the things that bothers me most, I love to hear that, what you just said about Kiev. But I'm not really surprised. One of the things that I'm most ashamed of is the bigotry that I felt towards Slavic people, also toward Muslims. I'll just be totally honest, because I lived through decades of propaganda from NBC News and CNN, where I worked, about this or that group of people and they're horrible or whatever. And then and I kind of believed it. And I see it now, like, we can't even put the word Russia at Wimbledon because it's so offensive. Well, what does the tennis player have to do with it? Did he invade Ukraine? I don't think he did. Stealing all these business guys' yachts and denouncing them as oligarchs. Like, what do they have to do with it? Whatever. Here's my point. The idea that like a whole group of people is just evil because of their blood, I just don't believe that. I think it's immoral to think that. And I can just tell you my own experience after 8 days there. I think it's a really interesting culture, Slavic culture, which is shared, by the way, by Russia and Ukraine. Of course, they're first cousins at the most distant. And I found them really smart and interesting and informed. I didn't understand a lot of what they were saying. I don't understand the way their minds work because I'm American, but it wasn't a thin culture. It's a thick culture, and I admire that. And I wish I could go to Ukraine. I would go tomorrow.
So I think after you did the interview with Putin, you put a clip, I think on TCN, where like your sort of analysis afterwards.
Yeah, it wasn't much of an analysis.
No, but what stood out to me is you were kind of talking shit about Putin a little bit. Like you were criticizing him.
Why wouldn't I?
It spoke to the thing that you mentioned, which is you weren't afraid. Now, the question I want to ask is, it would be pretty badass if you went to the supermarket and made the point you were making, but also criticized Putin, right? Criticize that there is a lack of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And
in the supermarket?
Yes.
Oh, you mean if I also said that? Well, yeah. I mean, of course I think that. I'm not. So I guess part of it is that I'm a little, because I have such a low opinion of the commentariat in the United States and the news organizations, which really do just work for the U.S. government. I mean, I really see them as I did Izvestia and Pravda in the 80s. Like, they're just organs of the government, and I think they're contemptible. And I think the people who work there are contemptible, and I say that as someone who knows them really well personally. I think they're disgusting. That I'm a little bit cut off kind of from what people are saying about me because I'm not interested. But so I try not to be defensive. Like, see, I'm not a tool of Putin. But the idea that I'd be flacking for Putin when, my relatives fought in the Revolutionary War, like I'm as American as you could be, it's like crazy to me. Anne Applebaum calls me a traitor to my, okay, right. It's just like so dumb. But no, of course they don't have, no country has freedom of speech other than us. Canada doesn't have it. Great Britain definitely doesn't have it. France, Netherlands, these are countries I spend a lot of time in. And Russia certainly doesn't have it. So that's why I don't live there. I'm just saying our sanctions don't work. That's all I was saying. And we don't have to live like animals. We can live with dignity. Even the Russians can do it. That's kind of what I was saying. Even the Russians under Vladimir freaking Putin can live like this. And no, it's not a feature of dictatorship. That's the most, I think, discouraging and most dishonest line, by people like Jon Stewart, who really are trying to prepare the population for accepting a lot less. He is really a tool of the regime in a sinister way, always has been. Like, how dare you expect that? What are you, a Stalinist? It's like, no, I'm an American. I'm like a decent person. I just want to be able to walk to the grocery store without being murdered. Is that too much to ask? Shut up, then you don't believe in freedom. It's really dark if you think about it, you know?
So there is a fundamental way which you wanted Americans to expect more.
You don't have to live like this. We don't have to live like this. You don't have to accept it. You don't. And everyone's afraid in this country they're going to be shut down by the tech oligarchs or have the FBI show up at their houses or go to jail. And people are legit afraid of that in the United States. And my feeling is, so? Like, show a little courage. Like, what is it worth to you for your grandchildren to live in a free, prosperous country? It should be worth more than your comfort. That's how I feel.
We should make clear that, you know, by many measures, you look at the World Press Freedom Index, you're right, U.S. is not at the top. Norway is. U.S. scores 71, same as Gambia,
really?
West Africa.
So let me just ask.
Hold on a second.
Now you're making me laugh.
Ukraine is 61 and Russia is 35. The lower it is, the worse. Close to China at 23 and North Korea at the very bottom, 22.
Didn't Ukraine put Gonzalo Lira in jail till he died for criticizing the government? How can they have a high press?
Yes, that's why they're 61.
But I'm saying, look, I don't know what the criteria are they're using to arrive at that. But I know press freedom when I see it. I try to practice it, which is saying what you think is true, correcting yourself when you've been shown to be wrong, as I have many times, being as honest as you can be all the time, and not being afraid. And those are wholly absent in my country, wholly absent. People are afraid in the news business. I would know, since I spent my life working there, and they're afraid to tell the truth. They're under an enormous amount of pressure, and a lot of them have little kids and mortgages. I've been there. So I have sympathy, but they go along with things like you are not allowed, if you stand up at any cable channel in the United States and say, wait a second, how did the Ukrainian government throw a U.S. citizen into prison until he died for criticizing the Ukrainian government, and we're paying for that? That's why it's offensive to me. We're paying for it. And that happens all the time around the world, of course. But this is a U.S. citizen, and we're paying the pensions of Ukrainian bureaucrats. Like, we are the Ukrainian government at this point. And like, if you said that on TV, on any channel, well, you'd lose your job for that. So like, that's not, I don't care. Or Norway is at the top. Really, Norway. If I went on Norwegian television and said NATO blew up Nord Stream, which it did. NATO blew up Nord Stream. The United States government, with the help of other governments, committed the largest act of industrial terrorism in history. And by the way, the largest environmental crime, the largest emission of CO2, methane. Could I keep my job? No. So how is that a free press?
We don't know that. I mean, the whole point of
in Norway?
Yes.
Well, as a Scandinavian, I can tell you they would not put up with that in Norway for a second.
It's been a while.
Deviating for the majority? No.
Well, but it's deviating maybe is frowned upon, but
frowned upon, yeah.
But do you have the freedom to say it if you do deviate? That's the question.
Can you keep your job? That's one measurement of it. Yeah, it's not the only measurement. Obviously, being thrown into prison is much worse than losing your job. I've been fired a number of times for saying what I think, by the way, and it's fine. I've enjoyed it. I don't mind being fired. I've always become a better person after it happened. But it is one measurement of freedom. If you have the theoretical right to do something, but no practical ability to do it, do you have the right to do it? And the answer is not really, actually.
You mentioned Jon Stewart. The two of you have a bit of a history. I don't know if you've seen it, but he kind of grilled your supermarket and Subway videos. Have you got a chance to see it?
I haven't seen it, but someone characterized it to me, which is why I pivoted against it earlier in our conversation about how the price of freedom is living in filth and chaos.
Yeah, that was essentially it. So in 2004, that's 20 years ago, Jon Stewart appeared on Crossfire, a show you hosted. And that was kind of a memorable moment. Can you tell the saga of that as you remember it?
I mean, for me, as I was saying to you before about how it takes a long time to digest and process and understand what happens to you, or at least it does for me. I didn't understand that as a particularly significant moment while it was happening. I just got off on a plane from Hawaii. I mean, I was out of it as usual. And I was very literal as usual. And And so from my perspective, his criticism of me, to the extent I remember it, was that I was a partisan. Well, he had two criticisms. One, that Crossfire was stupid, which it certainly was. In fact, I'd already given my notice and I was moving on to another company by that point. Crossfire was stupid. Crossfire didn't help. Crossfire framed everything as Republican versus Democrat. Whatever. It was not helpful to the public discourse. I couldn't agree more. And that's why I left. So that was part of his critique. Fair. I'm not sure I would have admitted it at the time because I worked there, and it's sort of hard to admit you're engaged in an enterprise that's like fundamentally worthless, which it was. But his other point was that I was somehow a partisan or a mindless partisan, which is definitely not true. It is true of him. He is a mindless partisan. But I am not, and I really haven't been since I got back from Baghdad at the beginning of the Iraq War, and I realized that the Republican Party, which I'd voted for, my whole life to that point and had supported in general, was like pushing this really horrible thing that was going to hurt the United States, which in time it really did. The Iraq War really hurt the United States. And I realized that I had been on the wrong side of it. I said so publicly immediately. From Baghdad, I said that to the New York Times, and I really meant it. I mean it now. And so to call me partisan, you could call me stupid. You could call me wrong. I certainly have been wrong. But partisan, I just didn't think it was a meaningful... I mean, it's like, that's just not true. It's the opposite of true. So I didn't really take it seriously at all. And I never thought much of him. So I was like, whatever, some buffoon jumping around on my show, grandstanding. But I do think it was recorded. And by the way, that happened right at the moment that YouTube began. I think that was one of the first big YouTube videos. It was one of the first big YouTube videos. So it had a virality that, if that's a word, it went everywhere in a way that didn't used to happen in cable news. I mean, by that point, that was 20 years ago, as you point out. I've been in cable news for 9 years. So before 2004, we would say something on television and then it would be lost. Like, people could claim they heard it, but you'd have to go to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville archives to get it. Suddenly, everything we said would live forever on the internet, which is good, by the way. It's not bad, but it was a big change for me. And I just couldn't believe how widely that was discussed at the time, because I thought he was not an interesting person. I think he's obviously a very unhappy person. I just didn't take him seriously then, and I don't now. But so anyway, that was it. It was a smaller thing in my life at the time than other people imagine.
Okay, you said a lot of words that will make it sound like you're a bit bitter, even if you're not. So you said unhappy person,
well, I think
partisan
he's an
person.
Unhappy guy. Well, he's definitely partisan, for sure.
So can you elaborate why you think he's partisan?
So I think that, and I see this a lot, not only on the left, but people who believe that whatever political debate they're engaged in is the most important debate in the world. And so they bring an emotional intensity to those debates, and they're inevitably disappointed because no eternal question is solved politically. So they're kind of on the wrong path, right? And they're doomed to frustration if they believe that. And many do. He certainly does. That whatever the